dramatically. And so we've gotten more and more money without having any cost attached to it. And if we still had our 16 or 17 million, I guess, of float that we had in 1967, and it was no cost, it would be very nice, but 17 million of free money is worth something, but it's not worth a ton. Having 7 billion, if we can achieve that as free money, it's worth a lot of money. And that growth has not probably generally been appreciated fully in connection with Berkshire, nor has the interplay of how having zero cost money in terms of affecting our gain in value over time. People have always looked at our asset side, but they haven't paid as much attention to the liability side. Charlie and I pay a lot of attention to that, and I mean it's not entirely an accident that the business is developed in this manner, and we have intentions of trying to make it to continue to develop in this manner and in that manner in the future. But we've got competitors out there too. Float per se is not a blessing. We can show you many insurance companies that thought it was wonderful to generate float, and they have lost so much money in underwriting that they'd be better off if they'd never heard of the insurance business. But the job is to get it in increasing quantities, but above all, get it cheap. And that's what we work at. And you do that in the business through having some kind of competitive advantages. You won't do it just by having an ordinary insurance company. The ordinary insurance company is not a good business. We have it in certain respects because of our attitude toward the business. We have it because of our financial strength gives us certain competitive advantages, and we have it in the case of GEICO because of a very low-cost operation. And it's up to us to try and figure out ways to maximize each one of those competitive advantages over time. We've built those advantages. I mean, in 1967, we were not looked at that way in the insurance business. We've built a position of competitive strengths, and in the case of GEICO, they had it without us, but we have bought into it over time. It's a very important asset, and you ought to pay a lot of attention over the years as to what is happening with that asset as to both growth and costs, and that will aid you in calculating intrinsic value. Charlie?
Nothing to add.
Okay. Is that Zone 4 is the next, Emily?
Henry Newhoff, shareholder, Dallas, Texas. My guess is that you consider the intrinsic value of the shares to be more than that represented by the price.
By more than represented by what?
More than represented by the current price of the shares. If that be the case, what would be your thoughts about Berkshire repurchasing its own shares?
Yeah, no, we have said we do not consider Berkshire undervalued at this price. We didn't say we thought it was overvalued, but we said we did not consider it undervalued. So a repurchase based on our estimate would not be in the interests of shareholders. It's conceivable it could be at some time, but we do not think that's the case. We think intrinsic value far exceeds book value, but we do not think it exceeds present price. We're not selling any shares, though, either. Zone 6.
My name is Carlos Lucero. I'm from Idaho. And my question relates to street names. Our stock at Berkshire Hathaway is in a family limited partnership. And in addition to that, it's in a street name. Now, what is the reason and the rationale behind the reason for street name shares not being able to participate in the charitable contributions by Berkshire Hathaway?
Yeah, we submitted a request for ruling to the IRS, I don't know, 15 or so years ago in connection with the shareholder designated contribution program, and the ruling we received specifies record holders and not street name holders. Now, that doesn't mean that a different ruling might not be obtained, but frankly, when we get into the multitude of indirect holdings and the problems we have with those indirect holdings in other respects, I think it would be a bit of a nightmare for us to attempt to get that program extended through into street name holders. I think the costs would far exceed the benefits, and I think that it is the situation that anybody with it in street name can move it into their own name if they want to. So I think with very small amount of effort on the part of an individual shareholder, it would offset an enormous set of problems that we would encounter at Berkshire. We can handle the present system. We've got 12 people there, and they run the annual meeting, they make movies, they do all kinds of things. And it would be very tough. And if an extra 10,000 shares participated, it'd be $120,000 of contributions. I just don't think it would be worthwhile. Our ruling doesn't presently cover the subject in any event. It's something we've thought about. Charlie?
Yeah, I think even if they changed the ruling, we wouldn't change the policy.
Yeah,
it would be administratively very difficult.
Yeah. We run into other problems in terms of people getting their material, just the material on the annual meeting, and we've heard from a number of shareholders that they can't get it from their broker, and they don't know what the B is all about because they didn't get their proxies, and it just street name posed more problems. Although we probably have more than, forget about the B, we have more than twice as many, I believe, holders in street name as in direct ownership. Although the number of shares is far. I mean, it'd be less than 20% of the shares, but it's probably double the number of holders. Zone 7.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Guerra. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. I've owned your shares for many years and appreciate the good job you've done. However, in this year's chairman's letter, you developed a concept a few years ago called look-through earnings.
Right.
And I failed to see that this year, and I'm wondering if that no longer is a valid concept or why you refrained from showing the data.
Yeah, that's a good question. I should have actually covered that in the annual report in terms of mentioning what, because I've talked about it and we'll talk about it in the future, and we do have a goal on look-through earnings of $2 billion in the year 2000, and that's going to be adjusted upward to allow for the fact there are more shares outstanding. It'll be the same basic goal. But there were two reasons that it was skipped this year, and like I say, I should have mentioned it. One was it was the longest letter we've ever had, and having that section in there would have elongated it even a bit more, and that coupled with the fact, and this is the important part of it, we had major changes in the composition of the company immediately after the end of the year. So our Capital City stock disappeared. At the time it disappeared, we didn't know whether it was going into cash or the all Disney stock or a combination. We had the acquisition of the other half of Geico, or even now the accounting treatment isn't clear. And I felt that the look-through earnings last year were fine, but I felt that by the time I got through explaining all of the adjustments you would have to make for the transactions then pending, that adding it to already the longest letter I've written would have slowed things down a lot and not been particularly helpful. It will be back in this year, this upcoming report and future reports, because it's a very important concept and it's something that we're focused on. It's just that last year's number would have been a mess by the time I got through trying to explain it. I normally, the accounting stuff I know puts a lot of you to sleep, but believe me, it isn't so much fun writing it either. So I skipped it this year. We'll have it next year. And the number would have been okay last year, but there would have been a lot of asterisks attached. Zone 8, please.
Yes, Mr. Buffett, good morning. My name is Ed Wolzak from New York. I'm a student and admirer of your investment philosophy. I have a question. In determining a company's intrinsic value, you seem to write or indicate that you project out a company's owner earnings for a number of years and then discount that back by prevailing rates. My question is, how much of a premium, if any, to prevailing risk-free rates do you demand when you discount back the owner earnings of a company? Or stated differently, for example, today with long rates at about 7%, if you did the same exercise with Coca-Cola, at what rate of interest would you discount back their owner earnings?
Yeah, we get asked that question a lot, and we've answered it to some extent in past annual reports about what discount rate to use. We basically think in terms of the long-term government rate, and there may be times when in a very, because we don't think we're any good at predicting interest rates, but probably in times of what would seem like very low rates, we might use a little higher rate. But we don't put the risk factor in per se, because essentially the purity of the idea is that you're discounting future cash, and it doesn't make any difference whether cash comes from a risky business or a safe business, so-called safe business. So the value of the cash delivered by a water company, which is going to be around for 100 years, is not different than the value of the cash derived from some high-tech company, if any, that you might be looking at. It may be harder for you to make the estimate, and you may therefore want a bigger discount when you get all through with the calculation, but up to the point where you decide what you're willing to pay. You may decide you can't estimate it at all. I mean, that's what happens with us, with most companies. But we believe in using a government bond type interest rate. We believe in trying to stick with businesses where we think we can see the future reasonably well. You never see it perfectly, obviously, but where we think we have a reasonable handle on it. And we would differentiate to some extent. We don't want to go below a certain threshold of understanding, so we want to stick with businesses we understand quite well and not try to have the whole panoply with all different kinds of risk rates, because frankly we think that'd just be playing games with numbers. I mean, I don't think you can stick numbers on a highly speculative business where the whole industry is going to change in 5 years and have them mean anything when you get through. If you say I'm going to stick an extra 6% in on the interest rate to allow for the fact, I tend to think that's kind of nonsense. I mean, it may look mathematical, but it's mathematical gibberish in my view. You better just stick with businesses that you can understand, use the government bond rate, and when you can buy them something you understand well at a significant discount, then you should start getting excited. Charlie?
Yeah, the discounts were once greater than we now see.
That's all you're going to get, folks. Zone 1?
Hi, Warren. It's Peter Newman, Nick and Racky's son. You can't see me because I'm on your hard left over here. And by the way, Racky says to send her love to you
Great.
and Susie. I'm going to take a cue from something that the guy who asked the questions about the World Book. I know you're loath to normally interfere in the running of your individual corporations because they do so well on their own. And I am particularly fond of See's Candy and their products. And you may or may not know that we have a chocoholic in our family, as you do in yours.
Yeah. Makes good chocolate syrup, too.
Yeah, I won't mention who. However, when I was in there this Christmas buying some gifts, I noted that with the exception of the little candy canes, there's nothing in that store that is fat-free. And we are facing a trend in the world, especially in dessert items and ice cream and candy items, of fat-freeness. And I just thought that perhaps it would be worth a word to management to consider expanding the hard candy line.
Yeah. Well, we look at a lot of things. One of the problems, as you probably know, for example, in using aspartame, is it doesn't interact well with heat, and so that's been sort of tough. Now, Charlie and I have kept getting our regular boxes of candy during this weight loss program, and we've devoured them. And candy, it's maybe on average 100 and depends on whether it's the sugared product or not. But to take the lollipop, it'd be about 110 calories per ounce. But that's 1.5 or 1 1.25 lollipops or something like that. Most things are, in that 100 per ounce to 150 per ounce range. So the candy is not a specific no-no. If we can find something that the customer likes that makes them think they're getting skinnier by eating it, that will be a breakthrough, and we look forward to it. And we test everything that comes along. I can assure you. In fact, Charlie and I may be the main testers, but Chuck Huggins is here today, and if you've got any ideas on it, who runs Seas, done a terrific job of running Seas ever since we took over in 1972. He'd appreciate ideas, but we are looking for things that appeal to the consumer, that taste good, and that they'll go for. I mean, just as is the Coca-Cola company in terms of carbonated soft drinks. So it's a constant subject, and there were high hopes on aspartame originally, but it just hasn't panned out in terms of candy. And I read a few articles about the it should be the fat substitute, which didn't get me too excited about trying it, but I'm not sure whether some of you read those articles or not. We'll keep looking, Peter. I appreciate it. Zone 2.
Good morning, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. As an aspiring shareholder, I'm very happy and proud to be here. Maybe I can encourage Mr. Munger to respond to my question this morning. In regards to your purchase of the other half of Geico, would you comment on your reasoning behind paying the premium above market value, and why you instead did not purchase shares in the open market?
Very many shares in the open market at the quoted price, and the price we paid for the large number of shares we got, we thought was a very satisfactory price.
Yeah, we put Charles at 100% rate. We also had a restriction that we agreed to many years ago, almost 20 years ago, as to the number of shares we would own without the consent of the directors and I believe the insurance department. So we actually had some special restrictions on us in the case of Geico, but if we hadn't had those restrictions, we'd have behaved in exactly the same manner. And we didn't think we could buy it any cheaper than that price, and we gulped a few times and paid it, and I think we will be happy that we did as it's turning out. Geico is doing very well. I mean, I knew it would do well, but I feel very good about it. Zone 3.
Mr. Buffett, my name is David Lowe from Ventura, California. My first Berkshire meeting, and I want to mention that I'm very intrigued at the influence you have over the shareholders here. I note that the first beverage they ran out of in the lobby was Cherry Coke. My question is about the Buffalo News. You say in the letter for the 95 report that the newspaper industry has lost another notch in its economic attractiveness. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, what you are seeing in newspapers is a circulation trend that has been prevalent for a long time in terms of newspapers per household, but that has been declining, and that daily newspapers, and that I would say the trends of the last couple of years are somewhat worse in that respect. I would say that the ability to price both at the circulation and advertising level has weakened a bit in recent years, not dramatically, but it's weakened a bit. At one time, newspapers really, daily newspapers in single newspaper towns were probably as attractive economically as any business you could find. I mean, a large percentage of advertisers had very little choice in terms of using them as an advertising medium. People had less options in the way of learning what was going on around them other than the daily newspaper. So they started from a position of extraordinary strength. They still have a very strong position, and I've tried to emphasize in that report. I mean, they're a bargain at the price they sell for. They give you all kinds of information with very low price, and they're a magnificent way for most merchants to reach their customers. But they do not have the exclusive advantages in many cases that they had 15 or 20 years ago. Third-class mail has become more of an option. People have more ways of obtaining information. As we talked earlier, information can be processed electronically and delivered at far lower cost than people dreamt of 20 years ago. So all of those things eat away a little bit. It's still a very fine business, but I don't see anything that will reverse those trends. I don't think that they will necessarily accelerate, but I think that if the only thing you owned in life was a daily newspaper in a single newspaper town 20 years ago, you would feel slightly less secure today than you did at that time, but you'd still be a lot better off than owning virtually any other business. Charlie?
Nothing to add.
How about Zone 4?
Mr. Buffett, my name is Hutch Vernon. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. I know that you read lots and lots of annual reports, and I'm curious what you are reading for, if you would share that with us. But I'm more curious, because I think I know what you're reading for, if there are any disclosures, any further disclosures that you would like to see companies make in their financial reporting, or that the SEC require in financial reporting or proxies or other communications with their shareholders. And that would be for both you and for Mr. Munger.
Yeah, the main thing that they can't mandate in annual reports, I really like to have, I like to know as much as I can about the person that's running it and how they think about the business and what's really going on in the business. In other words, I would like to have a report that would be identical to what if I to have a report that would be identical to what if I owned half of a company but was away for a year and I had a partner who owned the other half. When I came back, all coming up and all of that. Of the report is now the SEC mandates a lot of information and some of that is helpful. But there's an intent behind the report. I mean, if it's a sales document, I'm less interested. I don't see any way to mandate what I'm talking about, but that's the kind of report I'm looking for. What I'm trying to do as I read reports, I like to understand just generally what's going on in all kinds of businesses. If we own stock in a company in an industry and there are 8 other companies that are in the same industry, I want to own or be on the mailing list for the reports for the other 8 because I can't understand how my company is doing unless I understand what the other 8 are doing. I want to have the perspective of in terms of market share or what's going on in the business or their margins or the trend of margins or all kinds of things that I can't get unless I know. I can't be an intelligent owner of a business unless I know what all the other businesses in that industry are doing. And so I try to get that information out of a report. If I'm thinking about investing in a specific company, I try to size up their business and the people that are running it. And over the years, I found reading a lot of reports to be quite useful in terms of making business decisions at Berkshire. If we own a whole of a business, I want to own shares in all of the competitors just to keep track of what's going on. And I want to be able to intelligently evaluate how our managers are doing that, and I can't do that unless I know the industry backdrop against which they're working. It's amazing how well you can do in investing really with what I would call outside information. I find inside information, I'm not sure how useful that is, but outside information, there's all kinds of information around as to businesses, and you don't have to understand all of them, and you just have to understand the ones that you're thinking about getting in, and you can do it if you just, nobody will do it for you. You can't read. In my view, you can't read Wall Street reports and get anything out of them. You have to do it yourself and get your arms around it. I don't think we've ever gotten an idea, in 40 years from a Wall Street report, but we've gotten a lot of ideas from annual reports. Charlie?
What I find is that it takes a long time to read the annual report, even if it's a comparatively simple business. As if you really are trying to understand it, it's not a bit easy.
Yeah, I would say that on average, in a business we're really interested in, even though we know what to skip to some extent, what to read, I mean, it's going to be 45 minutes or an hour on a report, and if there are 6 or 8 companies in the industry, that's going to be 6 or 8 hours perhaps, and then there are quarterlies and a lot of other. I mean, the way you learn about businesses is by absorbing information about them, thinking it, deciding what counts and what doesn't count, relating one thing to another, and that's the job. And you can't get that by looking at a bunch of little numbers on a chart bobbing up and down about or reading market commentary and periodicals or anything of the sort. That just won't do it. You've got to understand the businesses. That's where it all begins and ends. Zone 5.
Mr. Buffett, my name is Hank Strickland. I'm from Fairfax, Virginia, which if it were a city would be the 10th largest in the United States. I'm here as a stockholder, and my daughter, who's also my broker, is here with me. We were also out there Friday night when we watched you warming up for the beginning of the ball game, and we noted that you didn't drop the ball. You seemed to be able to get it to the guy that was warming you up. We noticed your first pitch, which I had difficulty characterizing as either being a pass ball or a wild pitch.
It was a premature sinker, actually. Very, very hard to hit, I might add.
And then you moved sprightly into the stands, did a lot of picture-taking, photo opportunities, signed autographs, vaulted over a rail or two, and we noted with great enthusiasm your fitness. Now, that all having been said, many people would characterize Berkshire as a one-man company, with all due respect to Charlie. And many of us in this audience here, I'm sure, are retired or semi-retired. It's not unthinkable that perhaps you might want to retire, or for good God's sake.
It's unthinkable.
Unthinkable.
I don't want that one to go by.
or for something worse could happen. And for those
that would be the worst. I think.
Well,
I think death would be second.
I could think of some things some of us might want to do to protect our sizable investments, say, having owned Berkshire since blue chip stamp days. But anyway, we could put in a stop order, might take out an insurance policy. We might ask Charlie to masquerade as Warren after you moved on. Those don't seem like very attractive options. I'm very serious now. Yeah. How would you respond to the question of a stockholder that's really concerned about Berkshire being a one-man show?
Yeah, well, Berkshire is not a one-man show. It's a two-man show in terms of capital allocation. There's no question about that at present. But it's run by many managers that are doing an outstanding job and that don't need any guidance from Charlie or me as they go along. But I might say that I will die with all of my Berkshire stock essentially, and that stock will be held either in the family or in a foundation, depending on the order of death, for a long time thereafter. So there's no one that's more concerned about the subsequent management issue than I. I mean, this is not something that ends at all on my death, and it doesn't end for the Buffett family or the Buffett Foundation. So it's a subject that Charlie and I both thought about. The most likely situation, you got to get away from the idea that it's a one-man show, because right now we've got 33,000 people working for Berkshire out there, as we speak. And I'm sitting around, watching movies about myself or something. I mean, you can see how vital I am to the place. But the question, and the other thing we do besides allocate capital is we do identify these managers, and hopefully we make it attractive for them to stay and work for Berkshire. But that doesn't require 150 IQ or anything to do that. It does require a certain sensitivity to why people want to get up in the morning and do what they do. And when I'm not around, the logical, at some point, depends on exactly when it happens, but Charlie's a little older than I am, and it's likely that it will be broken into a two-person function again, but not exactly the way Charlie and I function, and that is that there will be someone in charge of investments and capital allocation. I mentioned Lou Simpson's position because he is younger than I am in the annual report. And then someone in charge of operations, and we have that person in the organization now. Now, I don't know what the situation will be when I die, because it could be in 20 minutes or it could be in 20 years. And when that, so I can't specifically name the individuals. We have the individuals now for both those functions. We'll have the individuals for the same functions 20 years from now. I don't know whether they'll be the same people. But it's quite a logical way to run the business. GEICO was run that way and still is run that way, and has been for some years. It's always struck me as terribly illogical the way property casualty insurance companies are run, because they've been dominated by the underwriting side of the business, and here they have this important investment side. But it's always been, virtually every company's been subservient to the underwriting. And GEICO very logically set up a co-CEO arrangement some years back, where originally Bill Snyder and before that, but Tony Nicely ran the underwriting end of the business, and Lou Simpson ran the investment side. And those are two very different functions. Same person logically doesn't fit both functions in most cases. I mean, it's a rarity when the same person happens to hit for both functions. So GEICO worked very well that way, still works that way. Lou runs investments, Tony runs underwriting. And Berkshire, slightly different. It's a variant on it, but essentially at Berkshire headquarters you need someone overseeing and not meddling in them too much, but making sure you've got the right manager and you're treating them fairly. You need someone on the operating side. You need someone on the investment and capital allocation side. We've got those people now, and we'll have them, whenever it happens too. But that is the structure, and we've got some very good businesses. And nobody's buying See's Candy because they think I'm sitting in some office in Omaha, and no one's buying a GEICO insurance policy because my name is there as chairman or CEO. The businesses are marvelous businesses. They'll continue very well. And there will be a capital allocation problem then, just like there is now, and there will be the problem of keeping good managers in place and treating them fairly, and that's a solvable problem. So that's the future as seen from Kiewit Plaza. Charlie?
Yes, if you just run your mind through all the assets, I think you will quickly decide that there are large momentums in place that would do very well without us. Is Coca-Cola going to suddenly stop selling because some manager's dead at Berkshire Hathaway? Are the people going to stop using Gillette razor blades? Is GEICO suddenly going to stop being intelligently run? Is the Nebraska Furniture Mart going to try any less hard? So the existing assets, you can argue, have been lovingly put together so as not to require continuing intelligence at headquarters. And what there would be a disadvantage in that I think would be unreasonable to expect that a successor would be as good at making new investments as Warren has been in the past. Well, that's just too damn bad.
The sympathetic ear over here. Let's see, where are we? Zone 6 now? Or,
Mr. Buffett, I'm indebted to Walter Schluss for introducing me to you some 40 years ago. And finally, in the early 80s, I became a stockholder. My question is, now that you've expanded headquarters 9% from 11 people to 12 people, do you now more frequently answer letters from stockholders? As a specific, had you looked at my letter from January 1986?
We haven't gotten to January yet.
Relating to Cap Cities, ABC, and Talk Radio, the problem that occurred last month at Cap Cities might have been prevented.
You should get a form letter from us, but we do not. we do not get into the activities of our investee companies. I mean, if people are unhappy about Coca-Cola or Gillette, and they shouldn't be, but if they happen to be, they should talk to the companies themselves. I don't interject myself into the management or operations of the investee companies. In terms of questions about Berkshire, I put in the annual report a few years back, just running Berkshire takes up a fair amount of time in terms of keeping track of a lot of businesses, and doesn't need to take up as much time as it does with me, but I enjoy it. But I feel that the annual report, the annual meeting, are the time to take up everything on shareholders' minds. And so I don't answer one-on-one questions. I get all kinds of letters. They want career guidance. They want advice on their business. I mean, there's a million letters that come in, and it would really be it would take a significant amount of time that otherwise would be spent on Berkshire to reply to that sort of thing. I may note them in terms of what I address in subsequent annual reports, but the annual meeting and the annual report, I feel, are the best ways to communicate with shareholders, and I really don't do. Okay, if we've got a monitor over in zone 1, we're ready to start.
Yes. Thank you very much. My name is Maria Nicholas Kelly. I'm from Tacoma, Washington. And my husband and I have rather different investment approaches. And in 1988, he bought me one share of Berkshire so that I could learn something about investing. We both started about that same time, and he has chosen to invest in, let's say, about 40 different stocks and buying and selling, and doing rather well for us, frankly. My approach is more simple and basically I finally figured out last year that I should invest in the companies of the two monthly, more Berkshire and Microsoft. So then this year, and so we've been able to do that. This year we read in your report that Berkshire is selling at a price at which Charlie and I would not consider buying it. So my husband has challenged my investment strategy. I know that you are an honest man, and while you may not recommend to my partner, Charlie, to buy more Berkshire at this time, do you recommend that I continue my rather automatic investment buying of Berkshire? And I think I know the answer, but I wanted my husband to hear it from the horse's mouth.
I think you're using me here.
What?
Well, we don't recommend selling it, but we don't recommend buying it either. We are neutral on that subject, and I hope you continue to be in with the two wealthiest guys. I like the other fellow too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Zone 2.
Mr. Buffett, I am Harriet Morton from the Emerald City, the same area, the land of Microsoft. And I have a couple small questions. The first one is recognizing your lack of interest in technology or sense of familiarity with it. I'm wondering if you'd give a few comments on Bill Gates as a manager. But the second one, dealing with a business that you're familiar with, has to do with American Express. Would you comment on American Express's strategy to deal with their declining market share in the credit card industry and the rising importance of debt cards? Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not sure I got that entirely, Charlie, did you? I mean, I got the part about the American
on Gates as a manager and American Express as with the problems in declining in market share.
Well, the first part is very easy. Bill Gates is one of the great managers of all time, and is an exceptional business talent who loves his business. And when you get that combination and a high energy level and now an heir to leave it to. I don't think you do much better than that. American Express has slipped over from where they were 20 years ago, obviously in the credit card business, and I think they may have taken their customer a little bit for granted for a while. I think Harvey Golub is very focused on correcting that and has made some progress. But the credit card business is a very different competitive struggle now than it was 20 or 25 years ago. Interestingly enough, American Express itself backed into the business because they were worried about what was going to happen to their traveler's check business originally, and they saw Diners Club come along, a fellow named Ralph Schneider, and started in, and they saw the inroads that were being made. So the credit card was a reactive move, and for a while they really dominated the field, and of course they still dominate the travel and entertainment part of it. But credit cards are going to be a very competitive business over time, and you need to establish, or American Express needs to establish special value for its card in some way, or it gets more commodity-like. It's not an easy business, but they've got a strong franchise. It is not what it was 20 years ago relative to the competition. Zone 3.
Good afternoon. My name is John Weaver. I'm a shareholder from Bellingham, Washington. You have discussed what a wonderful business is. One of the criteria is in your acquisition page 23 of your annual report is management. Could you discuss how you decide what good management is and how you decide whether you have a good manager?
The really great business is one that doesn't require good management. I mean, that's a terrific business, and the poor business is one that can only succeed or even survive with great management. And but we look for people that know their businesses, love their businesses, love their shareholders, want to treat them as partners, and we still look to the underlying business. Though if we have somebody that we think is extraordinary, but they're locked into one of those terrible businesses, because we've been in some terrible businesses, and the best thing you can do probably is get out of it and get into something else. But there's an enormous difference, frankly. There's an enormous difference in the talent of American business managers. The CEOs of the Fortune 500 are not selected like 500 members of the American Olympic track and field team, and it is not the same process, and you do not have the uniformity of top quality that you get with the American Olympic team in any sport. You do not get that in top management in American business. You get some very able people, some terrific people, like a Bill Gates that we just mentioned, but you get a lot of mediocrity too, and the test. I think in some cases that it's fairly identifiable who has done an extraordinary job, and we like people that have batted 350 or 360 in terms of predicting that they're going to bat over 300 in the future. And some guy says, I batted 127 last year, but I've got a new bat or a new batting coach. Some management consultant has come in and told them how to do it, supposedly. We're very suspicious of that. So we don't like banjo hitters who suddenly proclaim that they can become power hitters, and then we try to figure out what their attitude is toward shareholders, and that isn't uniform either throughout corporate America. It's far from uniform. We still want them to be in a good business, though. I would emphasize that, and we feel that. When I gave the illustration of Tom Murphy in the annual report, no one had either the ability, no one could top his ability or integrity in terms of the way he ran Cap Cities for ability or integrity in terms of the way he ran Cap Cities for decades. He not only thought about them, he knew what to do to forward their interests. And In terms of building the business, he only built it when it made sense, not when it did something for his ego or to make it larger alone. He did it when it was in his shareholders' interests. And they're not all Tom Murphys, but when you find them and they're in a decent business, you want to bet very heavily and not make the same mistake I made by selling out once or twice too. Was that zone 3 or yeah, zone 4?
My name is Mark Hake. I'm from Scottsdale, Arizona, and I'm very interested in your policies on diversification and also how you concentrate your investments. And I've studied your annual reports going back a good number of years, and there's been years where you had a lot of stocks in your marketable, equitable securities portfolio, and there was one year where you only had 3 in 1987. So I have 2 questions. Given the number of stocks that you have in the portfolio now, what does that imply about your view of the market in terms of, is it fairly valued, that kind of idea? And second of all, it seems that whenever you take a new investment, you never take less than about 5% and never more than about 10% of the total portfolio with that new position. And I wanted to see if I'm correct about that.
Yeah, well, on the second point, that really isn't correct. We have positions which you don't even see because we only listed the ones above 600 million in the last report, and obviously those are all smaller positions. Sometimes that's because they're smaller companies and we couldn't get that much money in. Sometimes it's because the prices moved up after we bought them. And sometimes it's because we may be selling the position down even. But so there's nothing magic. We like to put a lot of money in things that we feel strongly about, and that gets back to the diversification question. We think diversification is, as practiced generally, makes very little sense for anyone that knows what they're doing. Diversification is a protection against ignorance. I mean, if you want to make sure that nothing bad happens to you relative to the market, you own everything. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that is a perfectly sound approach for somebody who does not feel they know how to analyze businesses. If you know how to analyze businesses and value businesses, it's crazy to own 50 stocks or 40 stocks or 30 stocks probably, because there aren't that many wonderful businesses that are understandable to a single human being in all likelihood, and to have some super wonderful business and then put money in number 30 or 35 on your list of attractiveness and forego putting more money into number 1 just strikes Charlie and me as madness. And it's conventional practice, and it may, if all you have to achieve is average, it may preserve your job, but it's a confession in our view that you don't really understand the businesses that you own. On a personal portfolio basis, I own 1 stock, but it's a business I know, and it leaves me very comfortable. So, do I need to own 28 stocks in order to have proper diversification? It'd be nonsense. And within Berkshire, I could pick out 3 of our businesses, and I would be very happy if they were the only businesses we owned and I had all my money in Berkshire. Now, I love it, the fact that we can find more than that and that we keep adding to it. But 3 wonderful businesses is more than you need in this life to do very well. And the average person isn't going to run into that. I mean, if you look at how the fortunes were built in this country, they weren't built out of a portfolio of 50 companies. They were built by someone who identified with a wonderful business. Coca-Cola is a great example. A lot of fortunes have been built on that. And there aren't 50 Coca-Colas. There aren't 20. If there were, it'd be fine. We could all go out and diversify like crazy among that group and get results that would be equal to owning the really wonderful one. But you're not going to find it. And the truth is, you don't need it. I mean, if you have a really wonderful business, is very well protected against the vicissitudes of the economy over time and the competition. I mean, we're talking about businesses that are resistant to effective competition, and 3 of those will be better than 100 average businesses. And they'll be safer, incidentally. I mean, there is less risk in owning 3 easy-to-identify wonderful businesses than there is in owning 50 well-known big businesses. And it's amazing what has been taught over the years in finance classes about that. But I can assure you that I would rather pick, if I had to bet the next 30 years on the fortunes of my family that would be dependent upon the income from a given group of businesses, I would rather pick 3 businesses from those we own than own a diversified group of 50. Charlie?
Yeah, what he's saying is that much of what is taught in modern corporate finance courses is twaddle.
You want to elaborate on that, Charlie?
You cannot believe this stuff. I mean, it's modern portfolio theory, and
it has no utility. But I mean, it will tell you how to do average. But I think anybody can figure out how to do average in 5th grade. I mean, it's just not that difficult. And it's elaborate, and there's lots of little Greek letters and all kinds of things to make you feel that you're in the big leagues. But there is no value added.
I have great difficulty with it because I am something of a student of dementia, and I have.
We hang around a lot together.
And I can ordinarily classify dementia, on some theory structure of models, but the modern portfolio theory, it involves a type of dementia I just can't even classify. No. Something very strange is going on.
Yeah. If you find 3 wonderful businesses in your life, you'll get very rich. And if you understand them, bad things aren't going to happen to those 3. I mean, that's the characteristic of it.
By the way, maybe that's the reason there's so much dementia. If you believe what Warren said, you could teach the whole course in about a week.
Yeah. Yeah, and the high priest wouldn't have any edge over the lay people, and that never sells well.
Right.
Okay, zone 5 are we over there?
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger, Board of Directors. Wanted to ask, in looking ahead, do you see the trends of extensive outsizing, the offshoring, the downsizing, the expendable workforce, the right-sizing, the diminished commitment to company loyalty, and the greater emphasis on the short-term, quick buck bottom line versus your commitment to the long-term investment affecting your pool of investment possibilities and your decision processes, and do you possibly think of creating new companies on your own?
Well, I think that the trends you talk about, are the attention devoted to them, could have some. Trends you talk about, are the attention devoted to them, could have some. Historically, every industry at all times is interested in downsizing or becoming more efficient. Now, if the industry is growing, you can achieve efficiency by doing more work or turning out more output with the same people. But if you go back 150 years and look at the percentage of people in farming, for example, farming has downsized from being a very appreciable percentage of the American workforce to a very small percentage, and essentially that's released people to do other things. So it's in the interests of society to get as much output in anything as it can per unit of labor input. It's very difficult on the individual involved, and it's no fun. I guess it's no fun being a horse when the tractor comes along, or a blacksmith, and when the car comes along. But so I don't quarrel with the activities. I quarrel sometimes with how it's done, and I do think there's been a certain lack of, in certain cases, some empathy or sensitivity in terms of the way it's being done. You should try to make in cases some empathy or sensitivity in terms of the way it's being done. You should try to make that will require us off people over time, because we hope that physical output grows and that we become more productive and can keep the same number of people to get greater output. Dexter Shoe has done a great job of that over time. They've become more and more productive, but they've sold more shoes instead of selling the same number of shoes and letting people go. But sometimes industry trends, I mean, at World Book we have fewer people than we had a year or two ago, and we don't have any answer to that. Over time we got out of the textile business. I wish we didn't have to, but we did not know how to run a textile company in New England and compete effectively. Like I say, I love avoiding those businesses, and to the extent we can, we will. I mean, Geico is going to add people over time, and I think Berkshire Hathaway is going to add people over time. But it is in the interest of society to do jobs more effectively. It's also in the interest of society, it seems to me, to take care in some way of the people that are affected by that activity. And either in some cases it may be retraining, but in other cases, it doesn't work so well if you're 55 years old and you've been working in a textile mill all your life, and all of a sudden the guy that runs the place can't make any money out of selling your output. I mean, that's not the fellow's fault that's been working in the textile mill for 30 years. So there's a balance in that. I think that the attention that's come about lately, I think there's, to some degree, it was a media fad based on some particularly dramatic examples at a couple of companies. I don't think there is more displacement going on now as a percentage of the labor force annually than there was 10 years ago in terms of reconstituting what people do, but it's gotten a lot of attention lately. There could be a backlash on that in terms of corporate tax rates or a number of things, and we might feel it in that direction. We want at Berkshire to do everything as efficiently as we can. Part of that, in a big way, is not taking on a lot of people we don't need. A lot of the mistakes that are being corrected now are because people got very fat and their businesses got very fat in the past and took on all kinds of people they don't need. We see that in a lot of businesses that we're exposed to, and as long as they're very prosperous, really no one does very much about it. And then when time comes, they all of a sudden find out they can get way more output. The oil companies are a classic example. The people probably actually needed to produce, refine, and market oil probably hasn't changed that much. But if you look at the employment relative to the barrels produced, refined, and marketed, it's gone down dramatically over 20 years ago. To me, it just means that they weren't being run that well 20 years ago, and it never should have occurred in the first place. We don't want to take on more people than never should have occurred in the first place. We don't want to take on more people than businesses because we don't want to lay people off either. Charlie?
Name a business that has been ruined because it was over-downsized. I cannot think of a single one, but if you ask me to name businesses that were half-ruined or ruined by bloat, I mean, I could just rattle off name after name after name. It's gotten fashionable to assume that downsizing is wrong. Well, it may have been wrong to let the business get so fat that it eventually had to downsize. But if you've got way more people than are needed in the business, I see no social benefit in having people sit around half employed or unemployed.
And you're very likely to compete against some guy at some point who doesn't have more people around than needed in the business too. But it doesn't change. For the people involved, they've got real problems. And
Warren, can you name one that has been ruined by over-downsizing? There must be one, but...
Well, it's like Eisenhower said about Nixon, give me a week and I'll come up with something.
Yeah.
How about Zone 6?
Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger, I'm Walter Kay of New York City.
We're glad to have you here, Walter.
What?
We're glad to have you here. Walter's been a good friend.
Thank you very, very much. You just make me more of an egomaniac, a humble egomaniac by saying that. I don't know if Mr. Munger's wife is here and Mrs. Buffett is here, but back east where I come from in New York, they say when men are successful, it's their wife's doing, but if they're a failure, it's because they're lazy. But anyhow, I just wanted to, again, thank you very much for you've done such great things for our family. It's absolutely incredible. And to those of you who don't know these two gentlemen, besides being financial geniuses, and you all know Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger too, they're the finest human beings you'll ever meet. I mean, just the way they explain this downsizing is the most intelligent thing I've ever heard. And eventually, like, you know, these people eventually find work. They have to be re-educated and everything like that. But one point of business I'd like to ask you, if you don't mind. I have been noticing that there have been a tremendous amount of new capital going into reinsurance carriers. And I was wondering if you could make a few comments about that, if you think that will affect the reinsurance business, have any effect on the insurance business in general, because as you know better than I, we're still in a very soft market, and there isn't a month that goes by that I don't hear of some new reinsurance carrier, whether in Bermuda or London or somewhere. Thank you.
Okay. Walter knows more about insurance than I do, but I'll nevertheless comment on that. There has been a fair amount of capital, and there was a rush of it about, I'd say maybe 3 years ago into the reinsurance business, but there's been capital come in, and that is negative for our business. I mean, because any capital that's brought in basically will get employed. We are willing at Berkshire, and we do it, we are willing to sit on the sidelines in the reinsurance business. We'll offer quotes, but somebody that will cut those prices substantially if they've got a lot of capital and want to keep busy. And if you've got a lot of capital in this business, or if you attracted a lot of capital, you will do something. You might like to do something smart, but if need be, you'll do something dumb. You'll rationalize it so you think it's smart, but you will do it. You won't just sit there and write to shareholders at the end of the year and said, you know, we asked you for $300 million last year, and we'd like to report that it's all safely in a bank account at Citicorp. It just doesn't work that way. So they will go out and do something. People don't like to sit around all day and do nothing. And that means that prices will get cut under certain circumstances, and that's happening now. We will, at Berkshire, we do have a rule about downsizing on that, and we have promised people at all of our insurance operations that we will never have layoffs because of a drop in volume. We do not want the people who run our insurance business to feel they have to write X dollars in order to keep everybody there. We can afford some overhead around that's costing us a little money for lack of using it at full capacity, because it isn't that much relative to the size of our insurance operation. What we can't afford are people feeling some internal compulsion to keep writing business in order to keep their jobs. So we have a strong policy on that, and if the business falls away in terms of price, we won't be doing business, but we will be around to do business in a big way when the circumstances reverse. They reversed in the casualty business for a while in 1985 or thereabouts, and we did a terrific amount of business. They reversed in catastrophe reinsurance 4 or 5 years ago, and we became very active in that. And we will have times that are very good for us in insurance. It's a lot like investments. If you feel you have to invest every day, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. It isn't that kind of a business. You have to wait till you get the fat pitch. And in insurance, it's similarly. You do not. If we had a budget for premium volume for our insurance companies, it would be the dumbest thing we could do, because they would meet the budget. They could meet any budget I set out. I could tell some operation that wrote $100 million last year to write $500 million this year, and they would meet it. You know, and I would be paying the bills for decades to come. So it's a very illogical way to try and plan 8 or 10% a year growth. Now, GEICO is a different story in that GEICO is a business that is the low-cost operator and can attract from a huge pool business at I think, a very good rate of growth simply by letting people know what's available out there. So that is a business that I see growing under almost any circumstances. But our reinsurance business will swing around enormously in terms of volume based on what the competitor is doing, and what the competitors are doing depends to a great extent on how much money they've got burning a hole in their pocket. And right now it's going one direction, but it will change. I mean, it's just like investment markets change. You know, I've been through at least a half a dozen periods where people think, they're never going to get a chance to buy securities at intelligent prices, and it always changes. And in the insurance business, people that misprice their policies will pay the price for it, and the world will still need insurance, and we will still be there. Zone 7? Oh, we don't have any. I guess we have everybody in here now, so we'll go back to Zone 1.
Mr. Buffett, salutations from Portugal. I am from Portugal. My name is Herculano Furtado. I have been the shareholder of your company since it was traded on the NASDAQ. And I hold the shares and went on accumulating year after year whenever funds were available and were at my disposal. Now, a little bit about my history. As a student, I am from India. I was born in India, of Indian parentage, and my parents were very modest and could not afford me higher education. I started my school.
I think maybe you better just get to the question, though, if you will, please. Yeah.
And then started writing insurance, life insurance for a company which was a subsidiary of American Life. My question now is this. I am now living in Portugal, and I see that the European market is developing, and Berkshire Hathaway is having a very big slice of insurance investments. They don't seem to be operating in the new markets that are emerging in Europe, and as well as in countries like India or the Pacific area, where the two-thirds of human beings are living. Is there a policy or a plan on the part of Berkshire Hathaway to diversify and internationalize their insurance business? This is my only question.
Thank you. The reinsurance business of Berkshire Hathaway is totally international. I mean, we deal with risks all over the world. We deal with companies all over the world, and that's the nature of the reinsurance business generally, although there might be some that would be more specialized to this country. But we are quite willing to take on risks around the world, although they have to be risks with a large premium. I mean, that's the nature of our reinsurance business. We're not in the retail end of the business, but we do that worldwide, and we'll continue to do that worldwide because there are huge risks that exist for primary insurers around the world, and they need somebody to lay them off on. Now, whether they will pay the proper price is another question, and it may be a little more difficult in a few jurisdictions to do business than others, but that's an international operation. GEICO has 2.5% of the U.S. auto market, and we have about 2.5 million policyholders. There are over 100 million in the country, and there is such an opportunity here that it would be diversionary to go into other countries with GEICO. There's been a firm that was very successful over in England that introduced a somewhat GEICO-like operation about 10 years ago, and they did very well. They are now encountering more competition, and their results are falling off somewhat. But there's a huge potential for GEICO in this country, and I I would not want the management of GEICO to be going off in other directions now when there's so much to be done here. I mean, 3 percentage points on our growth rate here, for example, would be 75 million or so of volume, and that in turn would keep compounding over time. Well, there's too much to do here before we set up some startup operation around the world, and there are actually various problems in a lot of jurisdictions to run a GEICO-like operation, although I wouldn't say that prevails every place. I mean, there could be opportunities, but the opportunity here in this country is huge, and the management of GEICO is focused. I love focused management. But if you read the Coca-Cola annual report, you will not get the idea that Roberto Goizueta is thinking about a whole lot of things other than Coca-Cola, and I have seen that work time after time, and when they lose that focus, as actually did Coke and Gillette both at one point 20 to 30 years ago somewhat, it shows up. I mean, two great organizations were not hitting their potential 20 years ago, and then they became refocused. And what a difference it makes. It makes tens of billions of dollars worth of difference in terms of market value. GEICO actually started, they started fooling around in a number of things in the early 80s, and they paid a price to do it. They paid a very big price. They paid a direct price in terms of the cost of those things, because they almost all worked out badly, and then they paid an additional price in the loss of focus on the main business. That will not happen with the present management. Tony Nicely thinks about nothing else but carrying the GEICO message to people that 97.5% or so that are not policyholders, and that will work very well for us over time. Charlie?
We are indirectly in all of these emerging markets through Coca-Cola and Gillette. So it isn't true that we're totally absent.
No, well, at Coca-Cola, the international markets are 80% of profits, actually a little more. Gillette, I think they're about 70% or so. So we love the international aspects of the Coca-Cola or Gillette businesses, and that's a very major attraction. But the management of those companies is focused on that. But they have distribution systems, and they have recognition, and they've got a lot of going for them over there. But the beauty of it is that they're maximizing what they do have going for them, which was not the case 20 years ago. They just sort of let it go more by default, and they started fooling around with a lot of diversification, and basically that has not worked that well. So we like focus. We love focus.
Yeah, and doing it indirectly as we've done, one can argue that we thereby do it a lot better.
We won't explore the implications of that. Zone 2.
My name is George Olson. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I have a couple quick questions for you. First of all, I'd like to have your comments on the U.S. Air Preferred that there are several quarters in arrears on. And secondly, I was wondering about the Borsheim's report from yesterday. You usually comment on that.
Well, Susan Jock, who runs Borsheim's, called me this morning. Her voice was hoarse but happy. And Borsheim's, that comparable day last year was the biggest day of the year, and it was about 60% up this year. So you've done your part.
We are starting a new custom at Berkshire Hathaway's annual meetings. A shareholder came up to me and asked for my autograph on his sales slip from Borsheim's, which was a $54,000 watch. Now that is the kind of autographs we like to give. And so our message to you all is go thou and do likewise.
Yeah. It wasn't a member of Charlie's family, incidentally. The U.S. Air Preferred, as I mentioned in the annual report, it looks considerably better than it did 18 months ago or thereabouts, but their fundamental problem, and Steve Wolf has said this, the new CEO of US Air, the fundamental problems are there, and they either address and correct those fundamental problems, or those problems will address and correct them. And their costs are out of line. Their costs are those that are relics of a regulated, protected environment, and they are not in a regulated, protected environment. And so far, they have not had any great success in correcting the situation. Knowing Mr. Wolf, I'm sure he is, focused entirely on getting that changed, and he will need to get it changed. And his record has been pretty successful at that. So we're a lot better off with our U.S. Air Preferred than we were 18 months ago, but it still is a mistake I made, and we would have been a lot better off if I'd just, as Charlie says, gone out to a bar that night instead. You got any comments, Charlie? Yes, sir. He doesn't want to comment. It may sound like it's his deal, but
it's plainly worth a lot more than it was last year.
And with that, we'll move to Zone 3.
Hi, David Winters, Mountain Lakes, New Jersey. Without ruining my fun, could you give me a few hints about how I should think about calculating the intrinsic value of the insurance businesses? And secondly, I'm wondering about, not that you can foretell the future, either one of you, but with regards to newspapers, is there any concern that it goes the way of the printed World Book and blue chip stamps?
It could have. I think it's very, and I'll answer the second part first. I think it's very unlikely, very, very unlikely, down to a few percentage points that newspapers will go the way of blue chip stamps. World Book is a different story. World Book they have a reasonable shot at a decent future, but it's not automatic. But the newspaper, it may be configured somewhat differently. It may get a different percentage of its revenue from circulation and advertising that does. I mean, there may be some evolutionary type changes in it, but it's still a bargain. It is a bargain to anybody that is interested in their community. It's still a bargain to a great many advertisers. We spend a lot of money advertising in newspapers in our various businesses, and we feel we are getting our money's worth, obviously, and it works. But it just doesn't have the lock that it used to have on the business. Now, what was the other question about? Did you want to repeat the first one? Oh, the question about the insurance business, the intrinsic value. I would say this. We have, I'm not going to give you a precise answer, but I will tell you this. We have $7 billion presently afloat. That's the money we're holding that belongs to someone else, but that we have the use of. Now, if I were asked, would I trade that for $7 billion and not have to pay tax on the gain that would result if I did that, but I would then have to stay out of the insurance business forever, total forever non-compete clause of any kind in insurance, would I accept that? And the answer is no. Now, that is not because I would rather have $7 billion afloat than $7 billion of net proceeds of free money. It's because I expect the $7 billion to grow. And if I'd made that trade that I'm just suggesting now, if I'd made that 27 years ago and said, will you take $17 million for the float you have, no tax to be paid, float for which you just paid $8.7 million when we bought the companies, and gotten out of the insurance business, I might have said yes in those days. But
you would have.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
He keeps learning. That's one of his tricks.
No. Yeah. That's probably true in this case. I'm not sure about other cases, but it would have been a terrible mistake. It would have been a mistake to do it 10 or 12 years ago with $300 million. it is not worth $7 billion to us to forego being in the insurance business for forever at Berkshire Hathaway, even though it would all be, if it were non-taxed profit, so we got the full $7 billion, pure addition to equity, we would not take it. And we wouldn't even think about it very long. So, as Charlie says, that is not the answer that we would have given some time back, but it's a very valuable business. It has to be run right. I mean, GEICO has to be run right. Reinsurance business has to be run right. National Indemnity, Homestay Company, they all have to be run right. And it's not automatic. But they have the people, the distribution structure, the reputation, the capital strength, the competitive advantages. They have those in place, and if nurtured, they can become more valuable as time goes by. Zone 4?
Yes, I'd like to ask the chairman and Mr. Munger about Freddie Mac. A few years ago, I think they're earning most of their money from the guarantee fees and the float. Now they've got the huge balance sheet, a lot of short-term liabilities. Do you think that's a more risky business now, and that the spread might go away in some, less than foreseen event?
Charlie, I think he aimed that one at you.
Foreseen event.
Charlie, I think he aimed that one at you.
But horrible risks. It's still a very good business.
Yeah, what the question referred to is that formerly Freddie Mac emphasized normally just the guarantee of credit, and then passed all interest rate risk onto the market. Now they've retained for their portfolio a greater percentage of the mortgages that come through their hands. I think they've structured the liabilities quite intelligently to handle what they call in the investment world the convexity problem, but which is that the borrower has the option of calling off the deal tomorrow or retaining it for 30 years, and that is a very disadvantageous contract to enter into if you lend money. They've done quite an intelligent job of attacking that by callable debt and various things, but you can't address a problem like that totally. There's no way to set up some model that satisfies that entire risk. They've done a good job, but as Charlie says, the larger the portfolio as compared to guarantee fees, because you've still got the credit risk on the portfolio, and you've added a little interest rate risk at the extremes, and it doesn't keep us up nights, but it's a tiny bit riskier than it used to be. Zone 5. Well, you did what you wanted. I mean, you followed my advice. I'm batting 1,000. We'll see what you're batting next year. Yeah. Well, I won't comment on the 3 companies that you've named, but in general terms, unless you find the prices of a great company really offensive, if you feel you've identified it, and by definition a great company is one that's going to remain great for 30 years. If it's going to be a great company for 3 years, it ain't a great company. I mean, so you really want to go along with the idea of, so you really want to go along with the the idea of feel bad leaving the money on the trip, and you come back and it's going to be a terribly strong company. I think it's better just to own them. I mean, we could attempt to buy and sell some of the things that we own that we think are fine businesses, but they're too hard to find. I mean, we found See's Candy in 1972, where we find here and there we get the opportunity to do something, but they're too hard to find. So to sit there and hope that you buy them in the throes of some panic, that you sort of take the attitude of a mortician, waiting for a flu epidemic or something. I mean, I'm not sure that I'm not sure will be a great technique. I mean, it may be great if you inherit. Paul Getty inherited the money at the bottom in '32. I mean, he didn't inherit it exactly. He talked his mother out of it, but it's true actually.
Close enough.
Yeah, close enough, right? But he benefited enormously by having access to a lot of cash in the early 30s that he didn't have access to in the late 20s, and so you can get some accidents like that. But that's a lot to count on, and if you start with the Dow at X and you think it's too high, when it goes to 90% of X, do you buy? Well, if it does and it goes to 50% of X, it gets you never get the benefit of those extremes anyway, unless you just come into some accidental sum of money at some time. So I think the main thing to do is find wonderful businesses. Is Phil Carre here? We got the world. Yeah, there's the hero of investing. Phil, would you stand up? Phil is 99. He wrote a book on investing in 1924. Phil has done awfully well by finding businesses he likes and sticking with them and not worrying too much about what they do day to day. There's going to be I think there's going to be an article in the Wall Street Journal about Phil on May 28th, and I advise you all to read it. You'll probably learn a lot more with him by coming to this meeting. But it's that approach of buying businesses. I mean, let's just say there was no stock market, and the owner of the best business in whatever your hometown is came to you and said, "Look, my brother just died, and he owned 20% of the business, and I want somebody to go in with me to buy that 20%, and the price looks a little high maybe, but this is what I think I can get for it. Do you want to buy in?" I think if you like the business and you like the person who's coming to you and the price sounds reasonable and you really know the business, I think probably the thing to do is to take it and don't worry about how it's quoted. It won't be quoted tomorrow or next week or next month. I think people's investment would be more intelligent if stocks were quoted about once a year, but it isn't going to happen that way. So, and if you happen to come into some added money at some time when something dramatic has happened, I mean, we did well back in 1964 because American Express ran into a crook. We did well in 1976 because Geico auditors didn't know what the loss reserve should have been the previous couple of years. So we've had our share of flu epidemics, but you don't want to spend your life waiting around for them. Zone 6.
I'm Joe Condon from London. Both Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger have addressed my question in annual reports and at previous meetings here. This is my first time. It has to do with investment in a few great high technology stocks. I know your answer has been that if you don't understand it, and I can't, after this performance, can't really believe that both of you don't understand most of the high technology questions. But I'm thinking about not only Microsoft, but say Pfizer and J&J, all three companies which have already proven that not only do they have a great product, proven management over 10 to 15 years, great market share positions, which are not easy to get into. And I frankly don't see a big difference in the PE ratios, for example. If you say Coca-Cola, or against Johnson & Johnson or Pfizer, which are very powerful companies. I wonder if either or both of you would address that question again.
Charlie, why don't you?
If you have something you think you understand that looks very attractive to you, we think it's smart to do what you understand. If we'd been unable to find companies, slender talents, we well might have been in the to it. We don't sneer at it. Other people with more talent have found that a wonderful course of action.
We generally look at businesses. We feel change is likely to work against us. We do not have great ability. We do not think we have great ability to predict where change is going to lead. We think we have some ability to find businesses where we don't think change is going to be very important. Now, at a Gillette, the product is going to be better 10 years from now than now, or 20 years from now than 10 years from now. You saw those earlier ads going back to the Blue Blade and all that. The Blue Blade seemed great at the time, but the shaving technology gets better and better. But you know that Gillette, although they had that little experience with Wilkinson in the early 60s, but you know that Gillette is basically going to be spending many multiples the money on developing better shaving systems than exist now compared to anyone else. You know, they got the distribution system, they got the believability. If they bring out a product and they say this, they got the distribution system, they got the believability. If they bring out a product and they say this is something that, when they said to women to look at it, in the shaving field, they wouldn't have that same credibility someplace else, but in the shaving field they have it. Those are assets that can't be built, and they're very hard to destroy. So change, we think we know in a general way what the soft drink industry or the shaving industry or the candy business is going to look like 10 or 20 years from now. We think Microsoft is a sensational company run by the best of managers, but we don't have any idea what that world is going to look like in 10 or 20 years. Now, if you're going to bet on somebody that is going to see out and do what we can't do ourselves, I'd rather bet on Bill Gates than anybody else. But I don't want to bet on anybody else. I mean, in the end, we want to understand ourselves where we think a business is going. And if somebody tells us the business is going to change a lot, in Wall Street they love to tell you that that's great opportunity. They don't think it's a great opportunity when Wall Street itself is going to change a lot, incidentally. But it's a great opportunity. We don't think it's an opportunity at all. I mean, it scares the hell out of us because we don't know how things are going to change. We are looking, when people are chewing gum, we have a pretty good idea how they chewed it 20 years ago and how they'll chew it 20 years from now. And we don't really see a lot of technology going into the art of the chew, But, so that, as long as we don't have to make those other decisions, why in the world should we? I mean, all kinds of things we don't know. And so why go around trying to bet on things we don't know when we can bet on the simple things? Zone 1. I can see the shareholders like us sticking with the simple ones so they understand us. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Warren. Jerry Zucker, Los Angeles, California. In the annual report, the second largest holdings of unsecured securities are labeled others. Could you please expand on some of the holdings there? Like, do we still own PNC, and are we supposed to be buying Big Macs, as the press has reported?
Yeah. Well, actually, it's a very descriptive title, others. We do that for several reasons. But one is that we have no interest in people buying Berkshire or looking at the Berkshire report or anything else in order to generate investment ideas for themselves. Some people may do it, but we are not in that business. Berkshire Hathaway shareholders are not being paid for that. There's no way it benefits the owners of the company. So we will not disclose in the way of our security holdings more than we feel we have to disclose in order to be fair about things that can be material to the company. And we certainly have no interest in disclosing them to people who essentially want to use the information to try and figure out where our buying power may be subsequently or something of the sort. So we we will keep raising the cutoff level, and you may see more and more in others. And I will say this: there's a lot of speculation about what we do in the press, and I'd say about half of it's accurate and about half of it's inaccurate. And again, we leave to you the fun of figuring out which half is right. Yeah, we hope you get a lot for your money in buying a share of Berkshire, but we don't want to act as an investment advisory service. Zone 2.
David Coles, Appleton, Wisconsin. Earlier you made reference to the vicissitudes of time. What are the plans to ensure that all the computer systems and companies in which Berkshire has an interest will function correctly with dates of January 1st, the year 2000 and beyond? And what will you do to reassure shareholders that we will not suffer serious business loss or failure due to incorrect handling of these dates by computer systems?
Well, actually, I've got a friend that's quite involved in the question of. No, I'm serious about that. The 2000 question with computers, but that's the kind of thing I don't worry about. I mean, I will let the people who run the operating businesses work on that, and I'll work on capital allocation. And I have a feeling one way or another we'll get through it. But that, like I say, there are a lot of things at Berkshire we don't spend a lot of time on a lot of things at headquarters that other companies have whole departments on. And our managers have not let us down. I mean, I must say that we've got a group at one business after another, and they focus on their business, and they mail the money to us in Omaha, and we're all happy. Charlie?
I have the feeling that our people will be quite good at keeping the computer systems in order and with backups. I also have the feeling that few companies could handle a big computer snafu better than we could. I have the feeling the Coca-Cola stock would be there, the Gillette stock would be there, the Nebraska Furniture Mart would be full of furniture and know the customers. I don't think a computer crash is going to do us in.
You're correct, though, that is a problem for the computer world. But as Charlie says, it'll hit other people a lot harder than it hits us. Most of the things we try to be in businesses that are fairly simple and that can't get all messed up. And by and large, I think that we've got an unusual portfolio of those. And when it gets to our investees, they're going to worry about those problems themselves. We really worry about allocating money around Berkshire and having the right managers in place. If we can do those two right, everything else will take care of itself. Zone 3.
My name is Peter Bevlin from Sweden. You have said that you like franchise companies that have that are castles surrounded by moats, companies that are possible you can have some prediction 5-10 years down the road. But aren't businesses like See's Candy, the furniture business, the jewelry business, the shoe business that are hard to predict the future 5-10 years down the road?
What was that on the last part of it?
Aren't these businesses hard to predict 5 or 10 years down the road?
I think
things like shoe business.
Yeah, I think they're far easier to predict than most businesses. I think I can come closer to telling you the future of virtually all of the businesses we have, and not just because we have them. I mean, if they belong to somebody else. Then if I took the Dow 30, excluding the ones we own, or the first 100 companies alphabetically on the New York Stock Exchange, I think ours are way easier to predict. They're fair. They tend to be fundamental things, fairly simple. Rate of change is not fast. So I feel pretty comfortable. I think when you look at Berkshire 5 years from now, the businesses we have now will be performing pretty much as we've anticipated at this time. I hope there are some new ones, and I hope they're big ones, but I don't think that we'll have had lots of surprises in the present one. My guess is we'll have had one surprise. I don't know what it'll be, but I mean, that happens in life, but there won't be a series of them. Whereas if we were to buy, if we owned a base metals business or or many retailing businesses I can think of, or an auto business. I'm not sure I know where we would stand in the competitive pecking order 5 or 10 years from now. I would not want to try and come in and displace See's Candies, for example, in the business it does, or the Furniture Mart. It's not an easy job. So I don't think you'll get lots of surprises with the present businesses of Berkshire, but the key is developing more of them. Zone 4.
My name is Stafford Ordahl. I'm from Morris, New York. I was just wondering if the surprise could be coming from Disney, because it seems to me they've been coasting up until very recently on the efforts of a person that's no longer with the company, Katzenberg, who is one of those rare geniuses like Spielberg that has his finger on the pulse of the American people, and that they don't come along every day, even in Hollywood. Yeah. It might be a very different company now that all of his efforts are, so to speak, out of the pipeline.
Yeah. Have you finished, or?
Yes.
Yeah. Katzenberg is a real talent. I would say that by far the most important person at Disney in the last 12 years or whatever it's been has been Michael Eisner. I mean, if you know him and what he has done in the business, there's no one. Frank Wells did a terrific job in conjunction with Eisner, but Eisner has been the Walt Disney, in effect, of his tenure. He knows the business. He loves the business. You know, he eats and lives and breathes it. And he has been, in my view, by far the most important factor in Disney's success. Now they face competition. The money is in, the big money is in the animated films and everything that revolves around that, because you go from films to parks to character merchandising and back, and I mean it's a circular sort of thing which feeds on itself. There's going to be plenty of competition in that. I mean they've you've seen what MCA and Universal's going to do in the parks in Florida, and you know what DreamWorks is going to do in animation, and now you've got new technology in animation, through Steve Jobs, and there's a lot of things going on in that field. So the question is, 10 years from now, what place in the mind, because it's a share of mind, it's not, they call it share of market, but it starts with share of mind, and what place in the mind of billions of children around the world and their parents does Disney itself have, and their characters, relative to that owned by other organizations and other characters? And it's a competitive world, so there will be people fighting for that. But I would rather start with Disney's hand than anyone else's by some margin, and I would rather start with Michael Eisner running the place than with anyone else by some margin. So that does not mean that it can't become a much more competitive business, because people look at the video releases of a Lion King and they salivate. You sell 30 million copies of something at whatever it may be, $16 or $17, and you can figure out the manufacturing costs, and it gets your attention, and it gets your competitors' attention. But going back, if I thought the children of the world were going to want to be entertained 10 or 20 years from now, and I had my choice of betting on who is going to have a special place, if anyone has a special place in the minds of those kids and their parents, I think I would probably rather bet on Disney, and I would feel particularly good about betting on him if I had the guy who has done what Eisner has done over those years, presiding in the future. Charlie?
Well, I think it helps to do the simple arithmetic. Suppose you have 1 billion children of low middle income 20 years from now, and suppose you could make $10 per year per child after taxes from your position. It gets into very large numbers. And I don't know about your children and grandchildren, but mine want to see Disney. And they want to see it over and over and over again. They don't want to see Katzenberg.
Well,
I mean, in terms of the trade name.
It's a pretty good trade name. I mean, when you think about names around the world, it's interesting that there's very hard to beat the name Coca-Cola, but Disney's got it's a very, very big name. And Charlie's point that they want to see him over and over again, and it's kind of nice to be able to recycle Snow White every 7 or 8 years. You hit a different crowd. And it's kind of like having an oil field, where you pump out all the oil and sell it, and then it all seeps back in over 7 or 8 years. Zone 5.
I'm Randall Bellows from Chicago. Thank you for this marathon question and answer period.
We enjoy it, thanks.
My question is on the security business, Wall Street firms in general, and specifically what you feel about Solomon at this time. Thank you.
Well, we know more about the security business than we knew 10 years ago, and it is a tough business to manage. There's a lot of money made in the business, and then throughout Wall Street, I'm talking about. There's very big sums of money made, and then the question is, how does it get divided up between the institution and the people there? And you get to this question. I've often used the analogy of, would you rather, if you're an investor and you get a chance to buy the Mayo Clinic, that is one sort of an investment, and if you get a chance to buy the local brain surgeon, that's another one. You buy the local brain surgeon and his practice for X millions of dollars, and the next day, what do you own? And if you're buying the local brain surgeon, you would not pay any real multiple of earnings, because he's going to have this revelation several days later that it's really him and not you there with your little stock certificate that's producing the earnings, and it's his reputation. And he doesn't care. Can you imagine Berkshire Hathaway advertising brain surgery? How much business we would do. So he owns the business, even though you've got the stock certificate. Now, if you go to the Mayo Clinic, no one can name the name of anybody at the Mayo Clinic unless you live within 10 miles of Rochester. And there, the institution has the power. Now, it has to keep quality up and do all the things that an institution has to do. But whoever owns the Mayo Clinic has an asset that is independent of the attitude of any one person in the place the next day. Wall Street has a mix of both, and there's some businesses that are more where the value resides more in the institution, and there's some where the value resides more in the individuals. We've got a couple of sensational people running Solomon, and they wrestle with this problem as they go along, and they seem to be wrestling considerably more successfully currently than was the case close to a year ago. But it is not an easy business to run, and it's not an easy business to predict unless you have a business that's very institutional in character, and there aren't many of those in Wall Street. Zone 6. Sorry, we got it. The microphone's over here. Yeah, just raise your hand, and the monitor will supply the microphone.
Thank you. Howard Winston from Cincinnati, Ohio. One question. Are you concerned about the rising valuations on the NASDAQ market, where companies trade at multiples of revenues instead of multiples of earnings?
The rising value of what did you say?
The NASDAQ market.
Oh.
where they traded 10 times revenues or more, 30 times revenues, instead of 10 times earnings.
Yeah. Well, we don't pay much attention to that because throughout the careers Charlie and I have had in investing, there have always been hundreds of cases or thousands of cases of things that are ridiculously priced and phony stock promotions and the gullible being led into to believe in things that just can't come true. So that's always gone on. It always will go on, and it doesn't make any difference to us. I mean, we are not trying to predict markets. We never will try and predict markets. We're trying to find wonderful businesses, and the fact that a part of the market is kind of screwy, that's unimportant to us. We tried a few times shorting some of those things in our innocence of youth, and it's very tough to make money shorting even the obvious frauds, and there are some obvious frauds. And it really is. It's not so tough to find the obvious frauds, and it's not tough to be right over 10 years, but it's very tough to make money being short them. Although we tried a few times way back, we don't look at indicia from stocks in general or from PEs or price sales ratios or what other things are doing. We really just focus on businesses. We don't care if there's a stock market. I mean, would we want to own Coca-Cola, the 8% we own of Coca-Cola, the 11% of Gillette, if they said we're just going to delist the stock and we're never going to, we'll open it again in 20 years. It's fine with us, and then if it goes down on the news, we'll buy more of it. So we care about what the business does. Yeah. Norton, why don't you give him the microphone there?
Thank you, Warren, for including me. out of order.
It's good to have you here. Norton represents a family that came in 1956. Yeah, that joined up with the partnership and been with us ever since.
Very, very fortunate connection.
Both ways, Norton, both ways.
And,
careful, Norton. We don't want you mobbed on the way out.
But I might say that it all began with my father discovering, thanks to a professor of finance that was also at the University of Oklahoma, Ben Graham back in 1940. And then later, when Ben Graham was about to retire, we were trying to find his protege. And clearly that was Warren, and so he belongs to that long tradition. But the question I wanted to ask was, you've mentioned the very strong companies that Berkshire has that are really international companies like Coca-Cola and the Gillette. But are you considering, or have you ever thought of considering the foreign companies that are undervalued, or have you for some reason not included that in your universe of companies to consider?
We've looked at companies domiciled in other countries, and we continue to look at companies domiciled in other countries. We wouldn't, we're happy for the U.S. and for Atlanta that Coca-Cola is domiciled in Atlanta, but would we pass on it if it happened to be domiciled in England? No, we'd love it if it were domiciled in England too, and we feel that the important thing is the business, not the domicile, although we're more familiar in a general way with domestic companies that are domiciled here, although they may make their money internationally. And we feel a tiny bit more comfortable, but for just a tiny bit, in terms of understanding the nuances of taxes and politics and shareholder governance and all of that, in something where we've been reading and thinking about it daily than someplace where we've had a little less experience. But we would love to find a wonderful business that is domiciled in any one of 30 or so countries around the world. We look some. We don't look as hard as we look at domestic companies. We're not as familiar with them, but I have read hundreds of annual reports of companies spread around the world, and we've owned a few, just a couple. They're usually not as big, so just getting the kind of money in many cases is more of a problem. But some of them are big, and we do not have such a surplus of ideas that we can afford to ignore any possibilities. And if we can find something with a market cap probably of at least $5 billion or greater that strikes us as having our kind of qualities and the price is right and everything, we will buy. Zone 1.
Good afternoon, Mr. Buffett. I'm Nelson Coburn from Silver Spring, Maryland. I have one question I want to ask that hasn't come up here yet. Where does the money sit that comes in, say, from dividends and whatever other income that comes into Berkshire that you're waiting to invest someplace else? Is it get someplace where it's taking in a profit, or is it just sitting gathering dust?
Well, we only have about 4 or 5 commercial paper names we accept. We're very picky about where we put the money. All gets invested. We do not have anything sitting around in the safe or any place else. So it's all invested. But we do not get venturesome in the least in terms of where our short-term money goes. So we only have, like I say, maybe 4 or 5 approved names on commercial paper, all of which I approve. I mean, if anything ever goes haywire on this, it's my fault. Right now we have maybe $1 billion and something in relatively short-term treasuries, and we have a little extra in some commercial paper, maybe. But you will never see us reaching for an extra 1/8% on short-term yields. Some of you may remember the fiasco in Penn Central in the commercial paper market. And Penn Central, around 1970 or thereabouts, was paying 1/4 point, as I remember, more than other commercial paper issuers. And of course, they one day, despite showing a positive net worth, I think, of $1.5 billion or so, they said they had a lot of net worth but no cash. Turned out cash was more important, and so they defaulted. Now, the interesting thing about doing that is if you're getting 1/4 point extra, and you came over on the Mayflower and you landed and you said, well, I'm going to apply myself to getting 1/4 point extra on short-term money, and you didn't make any mistake until you got to Penn Central, you would, aside from the compounding aspect, you would be behind at that point. And I don't like a business that you can do right for 300 years and then make one mistake and be behind. So we are very picky about short-term paper, but it is all invested, and when it's large amounts, it probably will be in treasuries. A couple firms use commercial paper we take. Zone 2, please.
My name is George Gatti from Zurich, Switzerland. I've got a question with respect to Solomon. Solomon experienced quite a large volatility in profits and even revenues in the past years. What are your views on how this will develop in the future with respect to volatility in profits and revenues?
I didn't get 100% of that, Charlie.
Yeah, well,
I can see, he can hear. We make a great combination.
Well, you can see we aren't wasting much around the joint. Solomon's earnings have always been volatile, at least all the time I've been around the place. And I don't think that volatility is likely to disappear. All that said, we very much like the people at Solomon, and they've done a ton of business with Berkshire over the years and in a whole lot of different capacities, and they've done it very well. So we're high on the firm as a customer, and the firms we like as a customer we think maybe other people will like as a customer, and generally we love it, volatile or no.
If you at Solomon, as well as other firms of that type, they mark their securities to market, and so that changes in those marks go through earnings daily, actually, but you see them quarterly. Interestingly, if you took Berkshire over the last 30 years and marked to market as we do now for balance sheet purposes, but not for income statement purposes because the rules are different in that case. If you did that, you would see enormous volatility quarter to quarter in Berkshire's figures. You would, I don't think you'd necessarily seen any down year, but you would have seen swings between a few percent and perhaps 50% or something. So, and if you looked quarterly, you'd have seen a number of quarters of losses, and you would have seen some great upsurges too. And the volatility would be extreme.